The dust of the high plains clung to Ilara's skin like a second hide, gritty and suffocating. For weeks they had been on the move, a slow, desperate pilgrimage. Her father, Elias, swayed weakly beside her on their weary old mare, his chest rattling with a cough that had become his constant companion. Consumption, the doctor in the last town had called it, a death sentence, whispered on the wind. Their money was gone, spent on a few useless tonics and the hope that the next town might offer a miracle. It was late afternoon, and the sun, a relentless eye of fire, began its descent. Ilara's own strength was failing. Her shoulders ached from carrying their meager bags, her feet were a mass of blisters, and her stomach had been empty for a day. She scanned the horizon, a vast expanse of rust-colored earth and sagebrush. Then in the distance, a sight that made her heart leap. A lone windmill, a tall sentinel on a low rise, and the faint outline of a ranch house. It was a sign, a prayer answered. "Pa," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "Look, a ranch. We can ask for shelter just for the night." Elias stirred. His eyes, once so bright and full of stories, were now clouded with fever. He managed a weak smile. "My girl, always finding the way." They reached the ranch just as the light was fading, a golden haze spilling across the yard. The place was well kept, with sturdy corrals and a large, inviting barn. But the house was silent, dark. Ilara led the mare towards the barn, the scent of hay and horses a comfort she hadn't felt in months. She helped her father slide off the horse, his body alarmingly light. "Just rest here, Pa," she said, her voice trembling with the effort to sound strong. "I'll see if anyone's home." She walked to the house and knocked, her knuckles raw. No answer. She tried the door. It was locked. A wave of exhaustion washed over her. Her father needed to lie down, needed to be warm. The barn was the only option. She led Elias inside, finding a relatively clean stall, filled with fresh straw. She laid him down and covered him with her worn shawl. He was already half asleep. Ilara sank onto the straw beside him, her head in her hands. The relief of no longer moving was overwhelming. She had tried so hard, fought so long, and yet they were here, at the mercy of strangers. The last bit of daylight disappeared, and a chill settled in the air. Ilara closed her eyes, intending to rest for just a moment. But the weariness was too great, too deep. The rhythmic chewing of a horse was the last sound she heard before she succumbed to a sleep so profound it felt like she was falling into the earth itself. The door to the barn creaked open, and a figure stood silhouetted against the pale moonlight. The sound that woke Ilara was not the gentle whinny of a horse, but the creak of worn leather and the distinct, purposeful tread of a man's boots. She jolted awake, her heart hammering against her ribs, and saw a tall figure standing over her. The man was a silhouette against the lantern light he carried, which cast long, dancing shadows across the barn. He held a rifle loosely in one arm. Her first instinct was fear, a sharp, cold jab of adrenaline. "Who are you?" she croaked, her voice thick with sleep. "And what are you doing in my barn?" The man's voice was low and gravelly, like a riverbed full of stones. He raised the lantern, and the light fell upon his face. He was not old, maybe in his early 30s, with a strong jaw and eyes that were a deep, unsettling blue. They were sharp, assessing, but she saw no immediate malice. "I asked you first," he said, his gaze flicking from her to the sleeping figure of her father. We didn't mean any harm," Ilara stammered, scrambling to her feet. "My father is sick. We have nowhere to go. Please, we just needed shelter for the night." She gestured towards Elias, whose breathing was shallow and labored. The man's expression softened slightly, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. He knelt down beside Elias and placed a large, calloused hand on his forehead. "He's burning up," he said, more to himself than to her. He stood up again, his presence filling the space. "My name's Silas. This is my ranch." Ilara's shoulders slumped in relief, a tiny bit of the tension leaving her body. "I'm Ilara, and this is my father, Elias." She waited for him to tell them to leave, to send them back into the unforgiving night. But Silas just stood there, looking from one of them to the other, his expression unreadable. Finally, he let out a long sigh. "You can't stay here," he said. Ilara's heart sank. She opened her mouth to plead, but he cut her off. "Not in the barn. A man's place is in a bed, even if it's a spare one." He glanced at her, and a hint of a wry smile touched his lips. "And a woman's place ain't sleeping in the dirt. You can stay in the bunkhouse. There's a spare cot. You can tend to him there, and I'll send for the doctor at first light." Ilara stared at him, unable to process his unexpected kindness. She had been prepared for suspicion, for rejection. He was offering a roof, a real bed, and a doctor. It was more than she could have ever dreamed of. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden. She tried to say thank you, but the words caught in her throat. Silas didn't seem to notice. He knelt down and, with surprising gentleness, lifted her father into his arms. Ilara stumbled to keep up as he carried Elias towards the small, one-story bunkhouse, a simple structure with a sturdy door. As they entered, the warmth of a potbelly stove welcomed them, a stark contrast to the cold air outside. The bunkhouse was Spartan but clean, smelling of leather and wood smoke. Silas laid Elias gently on a cot and tucked a wool blanket around him. Ilara pulled up a chair and took her father's hand, marveling at the simple comfort of being indoors, out of the wind. Silas stood by the stove, a silent observer. The tension, while not gone, had shifted. He wasn't a threat, but he wasn't a friend either. He was a man who had made a decision, and Ilara felt the weight of that unasked-for generosity. "I don't have much to offer for your trouble," she finally said, her voice quiet. "But I can work. I'll do anything. I can cook, clean, mend, anything you need." Silas turned from the stove, his blue eyes studying her face in the flickering lamplight. He seemed to be looking for something, a sign of her sincerity. "I don't need a charity case," he said flatly, his words blunt but not unkind. "And a ranch is no place for a woman to be a maid. But I always need an extra pair of hands. Can you handle a shovel? Can you toss a bale of hay?" Ilara's chin lifted. "Yes, sir. I'm stronger than I look." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'll bet you are. The name's Silas. Don't call me sir." He took a mug and poured some steaming coffee from a pot on the stove. He handed it to her, his large fingers brushing hers for a moment. "My name's Ilara." She took the mug, the warmth seeping into her cold hands. It was the first hot drink she'd had in days. It tasted like salvation. "The doctor will be here in the morning. He'll want payment. Until then, you and your father are under my roof, but when he's well enough, you'll work for your keep." It was a simple deal, an honest one. It stripped away the pity and replaced it with a sense of purpose. It was exactly what she needed. Ilara spent the rest of the night nursing her father, giving him sips of water from a tin cup Silas had provided. Elias's fever waxed and waned, and his breathing was shallow. He slept through the night, a peaceful sleep he hadn't had in weeks. Ilara sat vigil, listening to the creaks of the bunkhouse and the distant lowing of cattle. The stars were brilliant outside the small window, and for the first time in a long time, Ilara felt a fragile flicker of hope. She was no longer alone in this fight. The next morning the sun rose, painting the world in shades of red and gold. She heard the sound of the doctor's buggy approaching the ranch, and she felt a sense of dread and relief, her future hanging in the balance. Dr. Miller, a wiry man with a face weathered like old leather, examined Elias with a quiet, professional demeanor. Silas stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, a silent, watchful presence. After a long examination, the doctor straightened up, his expression grim. "It's consumption, all right," he confirmed, his voice low. "He's weak. The fever is dangerous. We need to get it down and keep him warm. He needs proper food and rest. And this." He pulled a small, dark vial from his bag. "Laudanum, to help him sleep and ease the coughing. But it's only a temporary measure. There's no cure, not really. We can only make him comfortable." Ilara's heart sank, the fragile hope from the night before shattering. "What about the cost?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Miller named a sum that was more than all the money she had ever possessed. "I can't pay that," she said, her head bowed in shame. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Miller." She felt Silas's gaze on her, but she couldn't look up. "It's on my account, Doc," Silas said, his voice cutting through the silence. Ilara's head snapped up. She stared at him, her eyes wide. "Silas, no," she protested. "I told you I'd work for it." He waved a hand dismissively. "You'll work for your board. The doctor's bill is separate. A man shouldn't die just because he's broke." His words were rough, but his intention was clear. He handed the doctor a pouch of coins, his face impassive. Dr. Miller nodded, wrote down some instructions on a piece of paper, and left. The silence that followed was heavy. Ilara felt a rush of complex emotions, gratitude, shame, and a fierce determination to prove herself worthy of his kindness. "Thank you," she finally said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "I'll work until it's paid off. I promise." Silas looked at her, and for the first time, his blue eyes were not just assessing, but held a hint of something deeper, something she couldn't name. "Don't promise anything you can't keep, Ilara. Just do your work. The ranch hand's bunk is yours as long as you earn it. Now the fence needs mending. Let's get to it." He turned and walked out, his long strides taking him away from her before she could find the words to respond. Ilara watched him go, feeling a strange mix of awe and bewilderment. He was a man of action, a man who didn't waste time on platitudes. As she began to follow him out into the sunlight, she knew that her life, and her father's, was now inextricably linked to this silent, solitary man and his dusty ranch. Days turned into weeks, and Ilara settled into a hard but purposeful routine. She was a quick study and a tireless worker. She learned to mend fences, shovel manure, help with the mending of tack, and even cook for the small crew of ranch hands that passed through. She spent her evenings caring for Elias, whose health had stabilized slightly, but whose recovery was agonizingly slow. He was too weak to stand, but his fever had subsided, and his appetite had returned. He often spoke of Silas, his voice filled with gratitude. "That man," he'd say, "he's an island in a cruel sea, a good man, Ilara." A bond of silent respect had formed between Ilara and Silas. They didn't speak much, but they worked together, side by side, their movements in a wordless rhythm. One afternoon, as they were repairing a fence post, a sleek black buggy pulled into the ranch yard, kicking up a cloud of dust. A man stepped out, dressed in a tailored suit that looked wildly out of place. He was Sterling, a land speculator from the city, a man with a reputation for sharp dealing and ruthless acquisitions. He had a slick smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. He strode towards them, his gaze taking in the humble scene. "Silas." Sterling's voice was smooth, a polished stone. "Heard you've taken in a pair of strays. A sick man and his daughter, is it? Generous of you." The word stray hung in the air, a thinly veiled insult. Silas stiffened. "They're not strays, Sterling. They're my hired hands." Sterling's smile widened. "Hired hands? Or something more?" His eyes landed on Ilara, lingering with an unpleasant assessment. "I've heard about the old man, Elias. Used to have a small claim west of here, didn't he? A worthless piece of scrub, I'm told. But he wouldn't sell it to me. Now that he's incapacitated, perhaps his daughter would be more reasonable." His words were a direct threat, a predatory offer. Ilara felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach. She had no idea her father owned land. Silas stepped forward, putting himself between Sterling and Ilara. "He's not selling anything, Sterling. You're on private land. I suggest you leave before you find yourself with a bullet hole in your pocket." Sterling laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Temper, temper, Silas. Just a friendly inquiry. But this is the West, and deals are always being made. I'll be back, and I'll have a better offer for the little lady. You two might want to think about it. After all, what's a little patch of dirt compared to a sick father's life?" He tipped his hat to Ilara, a mocking gesture, then got back in his buggy and rode off, leaving the taste of his arrogance in the air. Ilara stared after him, her heart pounding. The land! Was this why Silas was so kind? Was he just waiting for her to betray her father and give him the land? She looked at Silas, a question in her eyes. He met her gaze, his face a mask of stone. "Don't trust a word he says," was all he offered, and returned to his work, the silence between them now tinged with a new, unspoken tension. That evening, a storm rolled in, a black fist in the sky. The wind howled and rain began to beat against the bunkhouse windows. Elias was restless, the change in weather making his breathing even more difficult. "Ilara," he rasped, his eyes clear for a moment. "You must listen to me." He reached for her hand. "Sterling, he's a snake. He wants this land, my land, the claim I made years ago, the one I never told you about. It's a worthless piece, but he's been trying to buy it for years." Ilara frowned, confused. "But why, Pa? You said it was just scrub." Elias closed his eyes, his breathing shallow. I found something. A spring. On that land. A natural spring. A rare thing in this country. It would make that land priceless. That's what he wants. He wants to control the water. He knows it would give him power over all the ranchers around here." Ilara's mind reeled. A spring. The secret her father had kept for years was now the source of a terrible danger. She felt a profound sense of guilt. Her father had kept this secret to protect her, to keep them safe from men like Sterling, and now she had, inadvertently, brought them to the one place Sterling would seek to exploit. She felt a new kind of fear, not for her own safety, but for the safety of Silas and his ranch. Silas entered the bunkhouse, dripping wet from checking on the livestock. He saw the look on her face and the distress in her father's eyes. "What did he tell you?" he asked, his voice low. Elias, his voice weak but firm, recounted his story of the spring and Sterling's long-standing attempts to acquire it. Silas listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When Elias finished, Silas looked at Ilara, his eyes dark with a mixture of anger and concern. "He's been trying to buy up the water rights for years," Silas said, confirming Elias's fears. "He wants to control the whole valley. My ranch and all the others depend on that water source. He's been harassing my neighbors, trying to force them out. If he gets that spring, he'll hold us all hostage." Ilara's heart pounded. She hadn't just been a guest, she had unwittingly brought a grave threat to the man who had saved them. "I'll do anything," she said, her voice shaking with resolve. "We won't let him get it." Silas looked at her, his gaze intense. "This isn't your fight, Ilara, it's mine. You and your pa are still on your feet because of what I've done. You should just leave." "He's a dangerous man." "No," she said, her voice firm, surprising even herself. "It is my fight, my father's fight, and it's yours now too. You helped us. I won't run away and let him take everything you've built." Silas's gaze softened. He saw not just a desperate girl, but a woman of fierce loyalty and courage. He saw her reflection in the firelight, her face etched with a newfound strength. He nodded slowly. "Then we'll fight him. Together. But he won't be expecting that." It was a pact, a silent agreement born out of shared threat and an unspoken trust that was growing between them. Sterling didn't wait long to make his next move. The following week he returned to the valley, not alone this time, but with a few hired hands and a surveyor's wagon. He began setting up markers on a ridge near Elias's supposed claim, brazenly staking his territory. He also started spreading rumors in the nearby town of Redemption, whispers that Silas was a cheat, that he was taking advantage of a sick old man to steal his land, and that Ilara was his accomplice. The townsfolk, easily swayed by gossip and Sterling's promises of prosperity, began to turn against Silas. When Silas and Ilara rode into town for supplies, they were met with cold shoulders and wary looks. The general store owner was brusque, the blacksmith wouldn't meet Silas's eyes, and a group of ranchers watched them from the saloon porch, their expressions unfriendly. Ilara felt a wave of despair. They believe him, she whispered to Silas, her voice trembling. They think you're a thief. Silas's jaw was set, his face grim. They're scared, he said. Sterling's been promising them a better future if they back him. He's telling them he'll build a town around the spring, a city of the future. He's a snake oil salesman, but his promises taste sweet to men on the edge of ruin. The false accusations hurt, but what hurt more was the injustice of it. Silas had done nothing but help. Back at the ranch, a group of local ranchers rode up, their faces grave. Their leader, an old man named Jebediah, spoke for them. "Silas," he said, his voice hesitant, "we hear a lot of talk in town. About you taking that old man's land. We need to know what's going on." Ilara watched, her heart in her throat, as Silas looked at his neighbors, the men he had known for years, men whose families had been his allies for generations. "Jebediah," he said, his voice steady, "I have no claim to Elias's land. I'm helping him. I'm giving him shelter, food, and medicine. And I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. Sterling is lying. He's trying to get at Elias's land because there's a spring on it, and he wants to control all the water in the valley." There was a murmur of disbelief from the group. "A spring? On that worthless patch of dirt?" One of them scoffed. "If you don't believe me, ride out and see for yourself," Silas said, his voice rising in frustration. But Sterling had done his work too well. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and they were beginning to sprout. Ilara watched the ranchers ride away, their faces still etched with suspicion. She and Silas were alone again, facing not just a man with money, but a whole community that had turned its back on them. She felt a profound sense of helplessness. As she looked at Silas, the exhaustion and frustration etched on his face, she knew what she had to do. They had to expose Sterling's lies, and she would find a way, no matter the cost. Ilara knew she couldn't convince the town with words alone. Sterling's lies were too convincing. She needed proof. She spent the next few days in a tireless search, sifting through her father's old saddlebags and trunk, looking for anything that might prove Sterling's duplicity. Her father, his mind lucid but his body failing, tried to help, offering fragments of memory. "I kept a journal," he rasped one evening, "of my prospecting. The spring. I wrote about the spring, its exact location. I wrote about Sterling trying to buy it from me, too. He offered me a pittance." He pointed to an old, worn, leather-bound book in his trunk. Ilara found it, her hands trembling. It was a goldmine of information, meticulously detailed notes about her father's travels and discoveries. She read the entry about the spring, the excitement in his words as he described the clear, cool water bubbling from the earth. She also found a crumpled, official-looking document, a land claim filed in her father's name, with a surveyor's map. The evidence was right there in her hands, the proof they needed, but how to get the town to listen? She showed the journal and the map to Silas. He read it, his face grim. "This is good," he said, his voice low. "This proves Elias's claim is valid. But it won't be enough. Sterling will just say it's a forgery. We need more." Ilara thought for a moment. Then an idea sparked in her mind. "We need to get Sterling to admit it," she said, her voice filled with a newfound steeliness. "We need to lure him into a trap, and we need witnesses." She outlined a plan to Silas, a risky one that would require them to put themselves in danger. Silas listened, his initial skepticism giving way to a grudging admiration. He saw the fire in her eyes, the determination to fight for what was right. "It's a bold plan," he said, "and it could go wrong. He's a clever man." "I know," Ilara said simply, "but he thinks we're weak. He thinks we're afraid. We have to use that against him." She looked at Silas, her eyes meeting his. "I trust you. I know you're not trying to steal my father's land. You're trying to protect it, and I'm not afraid to stand with you." He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes was all the response she needed. In that moment, Something shifted between them. It was no longer a silent partnership born of circumstance, but a conscious choice, a bond forged in shared purpose and a deep, unshakable trust. It wasn't romance yet, not really. It was something far more solid. It was the foundation of everything that would come next. They set the stage. Ilara rode into redemption alone, carrying a small, locked metal box. She was dressed in her best, a simple calico dress, and she went straight to the saloon, where she knew Sterling would be holding court. The townsfolk looked at her with pity and suspicion. Sterling saw her enter, a smug, triumphant smile on his face. "Well, look who it is," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Come to finally be reasonable, little lady." Ilara walked up to him, her chin held high. "I have something for you, Mr. Sterling, the deed to my father's land." She placed the metal box on the bar. A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. Sterling's eyes narrowed, a flicker of greed in them. "The deed? Why not just hand it over?" Ilara smiled, a cold, empty gesture. "Because I'm not giving it to you. I'm selling it to you, here and now, for a fair price." Sterling laughed. "You think you can haggle with me? You're a child." "Then open the box," Ilara said calmly. "The deed is inside, along with something else. The price is simple, a signed statement in front of all these witnesses that this land is the one you have always wanted, that it is the land with the spring. You can then sign over your claims to the water rights to the other ranches in the valley. A trade. The deed for your admission of guilt and a promise to leave these good people alone." Sterling's face went from amused to furious. This was not the timid girl he had expected. "This is a trick," he bellowed. "It's a cheap lie." Just then Silas walked in, followed by a handful of trusted men, the few who still stood by him. "It's no trick, Sterling," Silas said, his voice ringing with authority. "The deed and the proof are inside the box. Ilara's father, Elias, kept a journal detailing the spring and your attempts to get it from him. It's all there, every step of your lies." Sterling, a cornered animal, lunged for the box. "That's a forgery!" A ranch hand grabbed his arm, holding him back. "Let's see what's in the box, then," one of the townsfolk demanded. The box was opened. Inside lay the deed, the surveyor's map, and Elias's old journal. Sterling's face went white. He was trapped. He could deny it, but the weight of the evidence and the public scrutiny was too much. I was just making a business proposal," he stammered, his facade crumbling. "I never intended—" His voice trailed off. One of the ranchers, a man who had doubted Silas, stepped forward. "You lied to us, Sterling. You offered to build a town on our land, but you just wanted our water." Silas told the truth. The tide had turned. With his lies exposed, Sterling was no longer a powerful figure, but a pathetic man, caught in his own deceit. Defeated and humiliated, he stumbled out of the saloon, a ruined man. The day after Sterling's public downfall, the town of Redemption was buzzing with a new energy. The ranchers who had doubted Silas came to the ranch, their hats in their hands, offering their apologies. They brought with them gifts of food and supplies. The general store owner offered a line of credit. The community had seen the truth, and they had chosen to right their wrongs. Elias, too weak to fully comprehend the victory, was moved to a comfortable bed in the ranch house itself. The doctor confirmed that while his health was still fragile, the absence of stress and the constant worry had done him good. He was on the long road to recovery. Ilara watched it all, feeling a deep, bone-weary sense of peace. The fight was over. The journey had ended. She was no longer running, no longer desperate. She had a home. One evening, as the sun set over the plains, Ilara stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching the last golden light fade. Silas came to stand beside her, his presence a quiet comfort. "You're a remarkable woman, Ilara," he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "You saved us all. You saved me." Ilara shook her head. "I didn't save you. We saved each other." I've learned that you can't get by alone in this world. You need people. You need a family." She looked at him, and her eyes, filled with a mix of gratitude and something more profound, held his gaze. "My father and we have nothing to offer you. The land is my father's. We owe you so much." Silas reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek. "I don't want the land, Ilara, not for a moment. And you don't owe me anything. What I want is to wake up and see you here every morning. What I want is to stand beside you and to build a life with you, not out of charity, not out of pity, but out of love. A love I found in a barn, in the middle of a desperate night." His words were direct, unembellished, and they went straight to her heart. Ilara leaned into his touch, a tear of pure joy and relief finally escaping. "I found the same thing, Silas," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I found a home, I found a family, and I found love. It was there all along, in the dust and the desperation, waiting for a kind man to offer a hand." The two of them stood there in the growing darkness, the sound of the wind, the scent of the sagebrush, and the vast open sky a silent witness to their new beginning, a testament to a love forged not in ease, but in the crucible of hardship, a love as vast and enduring as the West itself.